Okay. Well, hello and welcome to this HLPF side event, Stakeholder Forum and WWF International. What I would like to do is hand over our meeting to our chairman, Louis Meuleman. Louis, you might want to come here so that you can be seen on the webinar. So bear with me just a moment while I get that set up. And so Louis, if you want to come over and start with your opening remarks.
Thank you, Charles. Good morning. Welcome everybody here in the room and also online to the very first official site event of the HLPF 2026. So it's a big honor that we are the first to start. We are in the room, with the beautiful room 8, which was present from the UK government a long time ago, but let's not talk about football too much. My name is Louis Meuleman. I'm the chair of Stakeholder Forum for the Future, and we have today excellent speakers gathered. The site event is co-organized by WWF International. The topic is, Felix will introduce it a little bit more, and is and should be central in this HLPF, I think. This is about preparing the 2027 review of the 2030 agenda. This review will be a critical stepping stone towards shaping a post-2030 framework that is on one hand continuation of the agenda, but also better integrated and more adapted to the world as it has in 2015, which we are really going to work on. Our speakers will highlight key aspects of the primer of global stakeholder engagement, which Stakeholder Forum produced for UNEP a year ago under the European Commission funded grant. The program is swiftly already 5 minutes late, but it's okay. Managed. We will first have an introduction by Felix Dodds, Adjunct Professor at the University of North Carolina and a fellow at Stakeholder Forum. And then online, Elena Khishchenko will speak, who's head of strategic influence at WWF International. And with that, and without any further ado, I hand over to Felix now.
Well, I wanted to thank you for coming and wanted to do a little bit of explanation of what we've created and then what we hope will be some of the thoughts as we move towards the 27 review and, of course, beyond 2030. There was a discussion with the European Commission and with UNEP back in, I guess, May, June last year, recognizing that 27 was coming up and many of the people who will be engaged in the process perhaps were not engaged in the 2012 and 2015 process. So the idea was to try and give them something to kick off their own thinking in the context of 8 of the SDGs. And you could say, why those 8? Well, because UNEP sees some responsibility for being an advocate within the SDG framework of those 8. And some of those, not all of those 8, are under consideration while we're here this week and next week. And we are very lucky to have speakers on each of those for today. The approach of the primers was really to try and overlook, what the key elements that we and UNEP thought might be useful for those who are preparing their own thinking on the review next year. And remember, we're not going to change the SDGs next year. We're not going to add targets. So it is really looking at mostly what they call means of implementation, MOIs. But what are the challenges and the progress that have happened for the SDGs under review? What are the targets and indicators? So we've given you in one place that information. How the SDG fits into the medium-term strategy of UNEP, because as we were linking it to UNEP's own interests in those particular areas, we tried to do that. And we tried to show that, one of the great things about the SDGs and their targets was we're not just dealing with silos. Silos are important. It's important to have experts on water and energy, but we need to look at the interlinkages between those different SDGs. And so we tried to show where the linkages were. And we also tried to link it to the science report. So it was a very good paper done by David LeBlanc, who was in the Desert Secretariat for both 12 and for 15, who looked at the different SDGs and looked at which science reports and where the gaps were. And I do think that's a piece of work we need to re-look at. Because I might need your help if it's going to echo again. But I think that there are gaps in the science world, and we need to re-look at that kind of the 17 goals and what the science that's being put into those particular ones. We're always aware of IPCC and IPBES and the work of GEO and things, but I think there are some gaps in there. We tried to link it to the partnerships, and I'm not going to talk about it today, but I am speaking on a platform with the NGOs on Thursday on partnerships. I think we have a real serious problem on no accountability mechanism for partnerships. We tried to get that at a previous set of, there's a partnership resolution every 2 years in the GA, and we couldn't get some accountability mechanism. I think David Nabarra, who did some excellent work on nutrition, they've developed a very good accountability mechanism. There's one around Marrakesh. We need to relook at that process. And we needed, because of the work that's been going on clearly in the transformation of our society at the moment, we need to make sure it's through a just transition. And so those were the kind of background to what we're doing. And of course, I would advocate that you all get a book that's amazing. It tells you the history of the SDGs. It's called Negotiating the SDGs, and I did it with David Donahue, the co-chair, and Amina Leva, who was the Guatemala negotiator. But it will help you in your thinking about what or how we got to the situation. We live in a different time period now, and so we have to be realistic about what can be achieved in any beyond 2030 agenda. And so 2015 or 2012 to 2015 was a period of real advancement. It was not just the 2030 agenda, but it was also the Paris Climate Accord. We need to be able to defend those advances, and where we can, to be able to accelerate implementation. We hope today will be part of a run up to 2027 where we're able to really look at accelerating where we can together the implementation of those SDGs. And I'll pass this back to Louis.
So no, let's not do it.
I have to do it this way, I think. So I hope this works. Thanks, Felix. One of the things I like very much what you said was that you said that silos are important but need to be connected. There's the thing that silos are bad things. Good. The next introduction as kickoff is from Elena Khishchenko, and she's head of strategic influence at WWF International Global Policy Impact Team based in the UK, and she is online now. Elena is leading WWF network influence efforts on global policy issues in multilateral spaces, and this includes also advancing the post-2030 agenda of strategies. So, Elena, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure to convene this conversation. And thank you very much, Louis, and to the Stakeholder Forum for making this happen, and of course to UNEP for the partnership behind this primer. This is a very important conversation, and what we're going to hear about today in the context of the primer for the 2027 review, of course, matters enormously in its own right, but I also want to draw our attention that there is one explicit important connection here, and that this review is not going to be just a health check to the current agenda. It is also, of course, a ramp on to what follows next, and that is an incredibly important question as we're just 1 year away from the launch of the Beyond 2030 process in September 2027. And so as we think about this primer, as we think about the content of the data that we're going to see today, I want to specifically focus on 3 key moments that I hope we will all look at and pay special attention with the view towards Beyond 2030. First, that of course the environmental sustainable development goals cannot be reviewed, talked about, and seen in a silo. So it's incredibly important that we see them as underpinning all of the most important and fundamental areas of the other goals, but also of our society, really, looking at food, water, energy, financial security, health, stability, and many other aspects. So what we are hoping to see in this period now, and then use it as a bridge towards the future reflections, are what are the key systemic shifts that we need to focus on. Deadlines are deadlines, and it's incredibly important to look at goals and metrics, but ultimately, what are the big shifts that we need to prioritize now? And particularly as WWF, we see incredible importance in the energy transitions, in the food systems and financial systems, and those that can create real positive tipping points and give us hope for a much better future. And really center our thinking around those systems rather than treat 17 goals as separate 17 goals. And I'm sure the sentiment is really shared. So I'm really looking forward to reviewing that. I think second part is that this is also a credibility test in many ways to the progress that we must show, that environmental commitments are moving, that they're not just aspirations, and whatever, again, deadlines we're looking at, it's incredibly important to show credible progress, and that applies to the 2030 goals, but also to anything that comes after that. So that accountability is incredibly important, and so again, very grateful for the review and the primer that has been put forward. And then finally, that again, the leadership and the delivery have to come from the strong coalitions behind that, both on the government side, and we hope to see more and more champions stepping up, but in an inclusive process also from the cities, businesses, financial actors, rights holders, indigenous peoples in that sense, youth, civil society, because it's absolutely clear from everything we're experiencing now that the leadership, the vision, the real action has to come from multi-stakeholder coalitions, and that's the only way forward. So as you embark on this conversation, and I'm really grateful to all of the speakers today, I would love us to treat this primer as the first concrete step in building the bridge to also Beyond 2030, and really looking forward to the conclusion today. Thank you.
Elena is finished. We'll be back to you.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Elena. Very good that you highlighted that credibility and accountability are conditions for broad engagement. Take that as key conditions. Next speaker, and we will have now comments. The speakers. The first will be Tony Shee-Eggleton. She's director of the New York liaison office of UN Habitat. Previously, she was also tied with us for chief of New York UN Conference Group. Task for risk reduction and important things. Nash is going to tell us a few important things. React. Please.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it really is a pleasure for me to be here, and I want to thank the organizers for providing me with this opportunity to share some important reflections as we look to the 2027 review. Now, and I will speak specifically, of course, on SDG 11. Now, we know it's often described as the urban goal, but in reality, it is much more than that. It's the point where the ambitions of the entire 2030 agenda become tangible in people's lives every day. And we know that the 2030 agenda is a global agenda, but the success or failure is ultimately going to be determined locally in the choices made by national and local governments, in the investments and the decisions that are made in cities and communities, and importantly, in how we finance and manage urbanization. So why is SDG 11 so critical, and why, as we go to 2027, why is this important for us? We're at an important convergence where the SDG 11 is under review this year in the HLPF, and back to back, we have the midterm review of the new urban agenda. So we will have a rich body of evidence that is going to provide the pathway for us to see how transformation in our cities, how sustainable urbanization and all the interconnections are going to be critical as we consider moving forward for 2027. So SDG 11, the report is going to be launched later this, and it is going to show that progress is real, but it is neither fast nor enough nor equitable to deliver on our commitments by 2030. These, and there are of course some very encouraging signs. We're seeing that across 126 countries,
I don't think we can hear you anymore.
Reduction strategies and improving the collection of urban data. And I'm going to join Felix on the beam.
So 4 in every 10 urban residents still lack convenient access to public transport. More than 1.16 billion people live in slums and informal settlements, an increase of about 130 million since 2015. And even more striking is that 3 billion people worldwide lack access to adequate housing, making the global housing crisis one of the defining development challenges of our time. And this matters because housing is far more than shelter. It is really connected to all of the SDGs. It determines access to employment, education, healthcare, transport, as I've mentioned, public spaces, and economic opportunities. Importantly, it also shapes resilience to disasters and climate impacts. And we will hear more of this from my colleague, Raphael. It influences social cohesion, public health, and human dignity. And without addressing this crisis, it will be increasingly difficult to achieve SDG 11 as well as the other SDGs. Some other critical points that I want to put on the table. Cities, they are the ones that remain on the front lines of the climate and disaster risk. And between 2015 to 2024, disasters affected an average of 123 million people every year, while 141 countries now have national disaster risk reduction strategies, and 116 report having their strategies aligned to their local plans. We now want to see planning translate into implementation through resilient infrastructure, through stable housing, risk-informed land use, and stronger local preparedness. When we talk about better urban policies, this depends on better urban data. And since 2020, just about 44 additional countries have significantly strengthened their urban monitoring systems. This is progress, but certainly much more needs to be done because important data gaps remain. specifically as we heard earlier, on women, on children, on indigenous peoples, persons with disabilities, those living in informal settlements. And we all know this, better data drives better decisions. Now, the findings from the midterm review of the new urban agenda is also timely, and this is where member states are now contemplating and looking at a political declaration, not only to renew commitment to the new urban agenda, but what are the specific actions that need to be accelerated to 2036. Now, 10 years after Habitat Review, this review confirms that sustainable urbanization is one of the most powerful accelerators of sustainable development, and it underscores the need to place housing, integrated planning, multi-level governance, localization, climate resilience, and stronger local finance at the center of implementation for the next few years. It reminds us, importantly, that localization is not an aspiration. It is indeed a very strong and potent delivery mechanism for the SDGs, and we need to look at how we will strengthen that moving forward. Global commitments become even more meaningful only when they are reflected in national policies, they are aligned with our local budgets and planning, and around infrastructure, investments, and access to basic services that improve lives. Now, as we look to the 2027 SDG Summit, the message that I would like to share on behalf of UN Habitat is very clear. It presents a global milestone before 2030 and an important bridge for us on what comes next. So it's not just about focusing on progress. It should be about what do we need to redefine or to reassess to accelerate implementation in these final years up to 2030, but importantly, looking up to 2036, which is the time horizon for the new urban agenda itself. So as the conversations on post-2030 development framework begin, it's important for us all to reflect on how we're going to make these elements that I have reflected as a core part of the considerations and how they're connected to all the other SDGs. Now, as we heard from Felix earlier, as he held this very important publication around the negotiations of the 2030 agenda. SDG 11, if you will recall, was one of the very last ones out the gate in 2015. We can't afford to make that same kind of error, I would say, as we look to 2027 and the post-2030 considerations. Development is largely being driven within cities at the local level, and certainly this lens has to be brought to the table as we look on the post-2030 considerations. And importantly, how we translate what we're seeing, all the evidence from the SDG 11 review and the midterm agenda, how do we translate these into concrete actions on the ground? So I will leave it there, and sincere apologies as I have to run to meet with my colleagues. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your inspiring introduction. I must say, I find in my own experience, the SDG 11 and the localization of the SDGs is extremely important, but it's not always seen. I worked for 25 years, I think, at the national level at Adjunct Professor, and we didn't see that very much there. Then I moved on to the European Commission. From this European perspective, I noticed that the innovation was not at the member states level, but most of the innovation was at the local level, the subnational. So, as a good civil servant, we always try to circumvent the national governments and not directly to the local authority. Okay, but everybody has its own personal experiences, I think. But thank you very much, and I understand that you have to leave now. We move now to Rafael Peralta. He is the UNEP director of the New York office in North America. Previously served as UNEP's chief of staff from 2021 to 2018.
No,
It's complicated.
This man has a complicated history. And he worked in Haiti, the Central African Republic, in West Africa, the Western Balkans, as long as it's West, it's good for you, and Somalia. But without further ado, I would like to give you the floor. So please go ahead.
If it works. I think it works now.
Yeah.
Thank you, Louis. Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you to the forum. It's a pleasure to be with all of you today in New York. It's the first time that I joined a few days ago the office here in New York, and it's the first time that I have a chance to speak to anyone publicly. So delighted that it is with civil society, actually the most important stakeholders in this process. Now, I have to say, we're all looking ahead, 4 years away from the end of the SDGs. The clock's ticking, it's ticking very fast. And obviously, there's a decisive window, one that will close before we know it. And ultimately, 2027, the review that we will see in 2027 is going to be one that is more than a course correction, or it has to be one of a course correction rather than just a pure stock take. Now, we at UNEP are delighted to have partnered with the Stakeholder Forum on these primers. We think that they're going to help everyone to get a sense about this complexity around the goals. I think the primers cover 8 goals, if I'm not mistaken. And so we hope that these primers will help catalyze action, will help people imagine what is possible over the next year, will help stakeholders look for entry points, look for places where they could bring their voices, where they could promote action and catalyze movement forward. Now, our perspective is very clear. Environmental SDGs, or the environment writ large, is the backbone of the 2030 agenda. And it is not on track. The SDGs looking at the environment are obviously lagging behind, as you all know better than I do. That's why we at UNEP have put them at the core of our new medium-term strategy. And we've designed an impact framework around them to try to catalyze action through our work, but centrally informed through science. Now, where do we stand on the environmental dimension of the SDGs? We at UNEP, we monitor 92 environmental related indicators. Obviously, progress is uneven, and many show indicators stagnation or regression. According to our measuring progress work, implementation is lagging behind ambition, especially on pollution, on biodiversity, on climate resilience, and sustainable consumption and production. In our 2024-2025 updates, we stress that environmental pressures are increasing faster than policy responses. Now, we see that every day. We've just seen it over the last few days here with the extreme weather events. We've seen it over also in Europe with the heat wave. We see it in Africa. We see it in Asia. And we see impacts on land degradation, on ocean health, on chemicals and waste, and well beyond. Now, as we look at it from the standpoint of UNEP, what do we see as the key challenges to delivering on the environmental targets? Well, first and foremost, and I just spoke about that, an implementation gap. Policies, norms, regulations exist, but enforcement, resourcing, and local delivery lag. As my colleague Tony, she was highlighting a minute ago, significant data gaps. You need to measure if you're going to take action on something. And we see how we see a lack of consistent national reporting on many fronts, limiting evidence-based decisions. Number 3, we see fragmented governance, siloed approaches, and we recognize the importance at times of silos. But we see that this is, in many cases, leading to slow integrated solutions in areas such as water, energy, cities, climate, oceans, and biodiversity. Centrally, we see underpinning much of what we're discussing, a pattern of unsustainable consumption and production. This is not new. We've been raising this point for the last 7 years or 6-7 years now. And ultimately, the global economy is only about 8.6% circular. Much of humanity's production is unsustainable and becomes waste, aggravating all aspects of the triple planetary crisis of climate change, over biodiversity loss, and on pollution and waste. Now, and these unsustainable consumption and production patterns are also linked to a series of lock-ins. We see how there's a legal lock-in on many of these drivers. We see how there's an investment lock-in, a fiscal lock-in, an infrastructure lock-in, a labor lock-in, a behavior lock-in, and all of them create some sort of wheel that is difficult to break in, with dependencies going around from top to bottom. Now, we also see financial shortfalls. You're all very much aware of this reality and how environmental action remains underfunded, and action across the SDGs writ large remains underfunded. Centrally, we see justice transition gaps. Social protection livelihoods and equity are not sufficiently embedded in environmental policies. And lastly, we see a multiplicity of crises, with climate impacts impacting conflicts and vice versa, and economic shocks and impacting environmental outcomes, and so on and so forth. Now, we at UNEP, we are focusing on 4 elements to close the gap over the next coming years. Number 1, by strengthening measurement and accountability, and we're supporting over 25 countries on SDG indicators. We're supporting countries on the 25 SDG indicators that we are the custodians of, and we're trying to improve methodologies in reporting and helping countries in this regard. Number 2, through our science-based policy support, our different science reports are trying to shed a light on what pathways could be pursued to address many of the gaps remaining, as well as our measuring progress and impact and informing policy updates, the last one dating from 2024, therefore trying to help identify impact levers that can be pulled by different actors. Number 3, by focusing on circular economy and pollution action, and trying to build national capacity to measure and manage resource use, waste, and chemicals. And number 4, by promoting equity and gender integration, where UNEP supports countries in embedding gender equality and social justice into climate and environmental policies. Now, it is not our role to tell what stakeholders should be doing ahead of 2027, but we think the primers, as I said at the beginning, will help you imagine what is possible and what the entry points are. And we hope that you will be advocating for everyone to be, at all levels, to be prioritizing actions that deliver across multiple SDGs. And we hope that partnerships, and I look forward to hearing Felix talking about partnerships later this week, are going to be at the center of catalyzing action. I think I'll leave it here. Louis, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for your first speech here in this setting. And these were encouraging words. In December, I attended the UNEA meeting in Kenya, and I was a bit shocked about the state, not only the state of the environment, but also the state of support of a group of countries for environmental protection and for the environmental SDGs. And I hope this and also the work we've done with these primers can help with keeping this on the agenda, because it's too easy to shift things to later the moment or away from the core agendas. Thanks very much. The next speaker will be online, and that is Dr. Albert Boutade. He is online. Let's see. He's currently Group CEO of Africa Energy Services Group Limited, a company based in Kigali, in Rwanda. And Albert is currently also assisting the government of Lesotho as a senior energy advisor to the government and the coordinator of Mission 300 National Energy Compact implementation. So we're now talking about energy and energy challenges. So please, Albert, go ahead. Can you take the floor? Then you have to unmute yourself first. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Louis. So, look, I'm supposed to talk about the challenges of energy SDG 7, And I need to tell you that what I'm going to share with you is nothing very new to you, only real insistence and trying to elaborate on the extent to which this is happening. When I left the public office in Rwanda as a minister in 2010, I had the opportunity to go around the continent advising different governments. The Kingdom of Lesotho right now is the 7th country. Issues across Sub-Saharan Africa is more or less the same with different extents. And these include, but of course not limited to, lack of strong policy shifts and actions, deliberate policies that address the issue of energy access, lack of increased financial flows, both external and domestic, targeted strategic investments in key areas of need, and then an unprecedented issue that, of course, it happened related to COVID-19 that had resulted affordability shocks, and the recovery is really slow and also causing debt stress and lack of high-level political advocacy to ensure the clean energy transition reaches underserved communities. Now, elaborating on this, again, these are the aspects we have tried globally to do well, taking 2015 as a baseline year, moving from almost 1 billion people without access to right now slightly more than 600 million. Unfortunately, 85% of that is in Sub-Saharan Africa. Now, this again is different. The contribution from different countries also vary from country to country, but the average raise is attributed to by 3 countries to begin with. Others are not necessarily doing very well, but in Nigeria only has about 87 million people without access. Democratic Republic of the Congo, 85 million without access, and Ethiopia about 57 million plus minus. So that raises the average of sub-Saharan African countries to remain average high. Same thing happens with the clean cooking progress. Again, from 2.7 billion people without access to clean cooking in 2015, right now standing at around 2.1. Again, there has been some progress, but slow. And this is, again, not very encouraging at all. If the current trends continue, only 78% of the global population will have access to clean cooking by 2030. And this shortfall would leave nearly 1.8 billion without clean cooking, fuels, and solutions. And again, close to 1 billion, 970 million people lucky electricity of South Africa alone, and that figure may reach 1 billion by 2027. Why is this happening? Again, it's because of the population growth. When you look at the Sub-Saharan Africa, the number of people lacking access continue to grow at a rate of 14 million people annually, with gains in access outpaced by rapid population growth. The average growth of Sub-Saharan Africa stands at around 2.2%, while, as you know, in Europe, it's a negative growth. So this also does not necessarily make the situation better. Now, obviously, there are struggles and plans right now, and Mission 300, supported by the World Bank, African Development Bank, where 300 million people, additional people in South Africa should get access by 2030. From that, a number of countries, there are now close to 30, countries in sub-Saharan Africa that prescribed to the Mission 300, and each country developed its own national energy compact. So these compacts really are, I would say that these are strategic frameworks and platforms that kind of unique and compared to the conventional strategies and policy action paths we had in the past. Under this, you may well know that broadly, this is divided or covered under 5 key different pillars, and each pillar has its own role in trying to address this question. So, for example, we take pillar 1, which addresses the infrastructure distribution development, where I mainly talk about generation of power, transmission, distribution, and connections to as many people as possible, and trying to meet the targets by 2030. I have had opportunity to learn and experience what is happening in each country through the developed compacts, and some have been realistic to say by 2030 they will not have reached universal access. Looking at the path where they are right now as a baseline and going forward in terms of implementation and financing needed, it will be very, very difficult to reach universal access. So that's an issue. But the focus now is much more stronger from the policy, strategic, and implementation point of view compared to the past. Pillar 2 is about regional integration, cross-border power trade, where each country, some countries that are doing better, assist those that are not. For example, where I am right now, my company advising the Kingdom of Lesotho, it falls under the Southern African Power Pool, and imports power from South Africa and from Mozambique through the Power Pool network. The country is planning right now also to become net exporter of clean energy by 2030, and plans are being put in place in terms of generation and infrastructure for transmissions to reach that goal. Pillar number 3 is actually a core, which is the access, and especially looking at the last mile access.
Last point. Yeah, thank you.
Yes. Yeah, last mile access to make sure that people are covered along through their different off-grid solutions, productive uses, and so on and so forth. Pillar 4 and 5, which is the last sentence, is on private sector engagement, especially in generation, but also right now focusing on involving them in the transmission, where we have independent power transmitters internally, but also cross-border, and finally the utilities reforms to make sure that power distribution, power trade to as many people as possible is put in place. We think all these implemented, really by 2030, we might have reached a good pace. Thank you.
Thank you. I was afraid that you were one of these people who has the last sentence, which takes 10 minutes, but thank you for being, in the end, very concise and talking and giving a lot of information about how progress is moving slowly, sometimes too slow in your area. We have moved now to another presentation, comments of 5 minutes by Ingrid Timbo. She is Deputy Executive Director and Senior Policy Lead at the Alliance for Global Water Adaptation. So I think we're going to go into the water podcast, which is a documentary series focused on the intersection of climate change and water management. And she's done a lot of other things, but without further ado, I would like to give you the floor if you're ready.
Almost.
Is it okay to use my audio? SDG 6 has 8 targets and 11 global indicators spanning water, sanitation, hygiene, water management and efficiency, freshwater ecosystems, transboundary cooperation. So it includes quite a lot. Like SDG 11, the SDG 6 is being reviewed this week at HLPF, and we'll be launching a synthesis report tomorrow at a special event here in New York. So I'll give just a couple of kind of positives and negatives in terms of where we see progress over the last 10 years. So there's been noteworthy gains for water sanitation and hygiene access. Nearly 1 billion additional people have gained access to safely managed water. We have a long way to go to universal access, but that is certainly something to celebrate. There have been more marginal gains for water treatment systems, but that is also going in a positive direction. Certainly, there's higher political visibility for water systems broadly within the UN, which I think demonstrates the value of a dedicated global goal for water and sanitation, like SDG 11 as well. Water was one of the last ones to make it into the SDGs, so we're certainly glad that it did. And then the one that is really important, I think, in terms of thinking about kind of how we move forward and what has been discussed by several folks here, is there's a stronger recognition of the systemic role of water for climate change, biodiversity, ecosystem health, PRR, energy security, and to a lesser but growing extent, economic prosperity. And so I think that's really as well. Now, for some of the challenges, visibility hasn't really resulted in greater political will and the implementation of aspirations and commitments yet, although we are working on that, and I'll speak to that at the end. National water agencies are still relatively weak. Countries continue to grapple with fragmented water governance. Funding challenges, like have been discussed, also are a challenge. There's a $140 billion annual spending gap on water infrastructure alone. Currently, public spending on water infrastructure totals just about 1%. Although on this side, I work primarily with the UNFCCC on integration of water and climate change issues. And where we do see progress is in the climate adaptation agenda, because water is so critical to climate adaptation. And so there's a stronger push for water sector funding linked to climate funding. And so this is one example of kind of the benefits of pursuing multi-sector infrastructure as opposed to just WASH or public services. So, for example, water treatment systems for both water and energy systems. That way, you can kind of crowd in different types of funding, funders, private capital, et cetera, to de-risk investment. As has already been mentioned, freshwater ecosystem health has really plateaued, and in many places it's trending in the wrong direction. And then on transboundary cooperation, that is over about 60% of transboundary basins have an operational agreement for water, but progress is really slow. So, kind of moving forward within the UN system. This year is another big year for water because we have a UN Water Conference at the end of the year. And we're really trying to grapple with this question of what comes next, not only for water, but obviously for the whole sustainable development agenda. Different member states have put forward different options. There's no UN agency for water. We have UN Water, which is a coordination mechanism. But looking at different options in terms of a multilateral framework, following the example of Sendai. Other member states like Kazakhstan have put forward having an actual UN water organization with the UN, but that's really tricky right now. So we can also learn from what's happening in other conventions. So as I mentioned, I work a lot with the UNFCCC. There's strong stakeholder coordination mechanisms under the UNFCCC that could be looked at. And I would love to chat more about that further. Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm getting a question bubbling up after hearing most of the speeches about how to create interlinkages and create synergies between the different sectors, different SDG, 4P, because there's a lot to be learned and exchange of thinking from experience. The water sector, the energy sector are very much their own castles, or to not say silos. But let's now hear from the last speaker in this line, Daniel Terrell. He is representative of the Baha'i international community to the United Nations. He told me that he joined Baha'i as an intern and he never wanted to leave. Sometimes that's a really good strategy. He leads the Office of Work on Global Governance and the Environment. He's a former co-chair of the Coalition for the UN We Need the global organized empowerment of the NGO major group, and lots of other things. Felix provided to me huge CVs of all of the speakers, but I'm not going to read out. Daniel, please take the floor.
Sure. Thank you very much. Firstly, technically, should I unmute my Zoom?
Well, I would say you turn your camera back on.
I can do that,
Yes.
but I don't know if people want to see my face.
Yes.
Yes,
But they can suffer through my face, but should they suffer through my voice?
we're picking you up on the microphone, so why don't you stay as
So
it is?
maybe move the microphone closer to you.
Microphone close.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Well, there's 30 seconds of my time. I
Understand.
will keep it 30 seconds shorter then. So I often sit on these panels and I kind of wonder why I'm here, because I'm not an expert in any of the particular SDGs. And I just listen to this expertise and I think, boy, there are some really smart people doing really great work. And I love to just be surrounded by them and listen to them. But perhaps I'm invited in part because of that. So as I was reading these primers, I was actually thinking about a little bit more broadly, what is the purpose of all this? Why is there a United Nations? Why do we have the SDGs? What are we actually trying to achieve? And I don't ask it rhetorically, because I think what we understood to be development in 1945 is very different from what we understand to be development today. And that evolution has in some pockets accelerated and sort of structures have matched that shift. But in others, and I would say primarily in the dominant narratives of society today, they haven't. So we're trying to do this thing of sustainability and sufficiency in the face of a narrative about consumption and acquisition. And that's territorial acquisition, that's monetary acquisition, that's reputational acquisition. And if all you're trying to do is grab, that can't actually align in a world of 8.5 billion people, can't align with the principles of sustainability. And I think that contradiction is something that we shouldn't overlook as we're delving into the data and the statistics, which are super important and necessary. And I was thinking a little bit about this SDG review process in 2027. This is kind of our last chance to really understand what the limitations have been in the implementation of the SDGs. And to me, of course, we have sort of this layers question. Why haven't they been achieved? No, maybe it's because we haven't invested sufficient resources, human resources, financial resources, all of these things. But why haven't we invested sufficient resources? It's because that's not where the priorities are. We have not shifted our conception of progress to one that aligns with the 21st century. But why haven't we been able to do that? Perhaps because it's been hundreds of thousands of years where acquisition was the only way that we could survive. And now we have a world of sufficiency, and in fact of excess. And so now we actually have a distribution problem rather than an acquisition problem. But we haven't aligned our values to that distribution problem. In other words, we have, as a very quick analogy, you can see that we have an obesity problem that is actually greater now than our starvation problem. But we have both, which means that it's a distribution issue. It's not one of acquisition. And I think, what am I really getting at? Well, you need timers like this. You need this data, this information, so you have a very strong knowledge base upon which to build a different strategy going forward. But we also have to keep on asking that question beneath the question. Why haven't we achieved the SDGs? Why haven't we allocated the resources? Why are there other priorities and competing values? And then as we're reviewing it, it's not just about shifting a small set of funds from one place to another, but it's actually how do we expand our conception of progress so that those in the mainstream of society, those who are sort of the narrative makers, take on this new narrative of development. But again, you need things like this, all of this data, all of this information, so that when you're reviewing, you can agree on basic facts. And until you agree on basic facts, it's very difficult to peel the next layer to figure out why, which can then allow a different set of motivations that can say, we don't want people dying of thirst or drinking dirty water anymore. We don't want people living in homelessness anymore. And actually, we can overcome it, but it takes a shift in our conceptual framework. And I'm thinking, this review process will lead into the 2030, the next development agenda. And perhaps we can center a different set of priorities that will allow us to move beyond this consumption as progress mentality. Every city should look like New York mentality to one that allows for those who are in rural communities to also access education and healthcare and water and good food. And those living in urban settings can access employment and clean air and all of these things. It's really a shift of narrative, and you need the basic facts to start with. And for this reason, I'm very grateful to Stakeholder Forum for putting together this primer so that hopefully we can have that broader conversation in the months and years to come. Thanks so much.
Thank you for a very concise and very clear and a different perspective. I think we have still 15 minutes to go, and I hope there will be some time left for a discussion. But I would like to give the floor first to Felix and then Elena for some already concluding remarks, and maybe I can even give them 2 questions, maybe to also take on board. The first is, I mentioned it already, how to stimulate collaboration and learning across individual SDGs and sectors. If we talk about the fragmented approach of the SDGs, then you can do something concrete, very concrete, I think, bring parties together and organize more peer learning, I suppose, across the sectors. And the second was, I saw in the chat a question from Mexico, Virgilio Rivera, on CSOs that are not civil society organizations that are not recognized, supported by government. And then I thought, we talk a lot about localization, about the focus of local government. Why not team up more with local governments? It's not only the case that you need to be supported by national governments, but just work very closely for society stakeholders, work very closely with the subnational and the local government. I think that might be a recommendation, but I give the floor to Felix.
Always a danger to do that. And though those are interesting questions, I wanted to kind of deal with a few other things. I was very much involved in 2012 to 15. And one of the mistakes, I think, was that we didn't have under each of the goals and targets a section on means of implementation for those particular goals and targets. So the means of implementation deal with finance, governance, measurement, stakeholder engagement, technology transfer, and capacity building. And that would be different for energy, would be different for water, would be different for poverty. And I think that was a missed opportunity. I had hoped that financing for development would do that, but ultimately they didn't do it. And so I think the design, actually the best designed document that we ever had, was done by Maurice Strong. It was Agenda 21, because it gives you the goals, the targets, and then the MOIs under each of them. And so I think we need to be thinking about 2020, 2030, about a document which we know already will not have new goals. We're pretty sure that there'll be limited additional targets. But the wrap-round text that the 2030 agenda had is an opportunity to deal with MOI things. On water, I have to say, having run the Water and Climate Coalition at the UN FCCC from 2007 to 2011 with SIWI, when there was no mention of water at all, it's about adaptation and mitigation. It has to be both. And that was where we won the argument. There has been no water policy since 2005 in the UN system. I mean, other than bits of it. But we need to have, these water conferences can't just be a space where we just share partnerships. We need to look at where the water policy can be directed and what needs to happen. So I hope out of the UAE conference or the next 2 that we actually end up with a GA resolution on where water policy can go. I'm a huge supporter of partnerships. I always have been. I was involved with 2000 to 2002 in what they call type 2 partnerships. I'm dismayed about how we haven't been able to get a proper accountability mechanism. And I mentioned that before. I think the Sun Initiative has done some, the Marrakesh process has done things. We need to accelerate the good partnerships. So what are the champion partnerships that can have an impact? And we can look at Gavi. Gavi is a really good example. Or we could look at coalitions of the willing, like the methane pledge in the climate place. What else can we do outside the system? Because at the moment in the system, it's very difficult to move policy forward. I'm a huge supporter of UNEP Finance Initiative and the Glasgow Finance Alliance for Net Zero. Of course, that's suffered a lot because of the administration in the US, and a number of the banks and the investors have come out. But that addressed issues around the capital markets where you could really change the reward system so that actually you'd be supporting the renewable side and less the fossil fuel. And I'm going to end with a quote that I love. It's from Bobby Kennedy, the original one, not the one that's around now. Which he said at the end of his speeches in '68. Some people see things that as they are and ask why. We surely see things as they could be and ask why not.
Very good. Thank you, Felix, for this inspirational reflection. And let's move to Elena. What are your conclusions or your first impressions after what you heard?
Thank you so much, Louis. And I will be quick as I know we're at the very end of this conversation. I want to thank all the panelists today for a very in-depth discussion. And I think what really struck me is that even though in each of the reviews, in each of the goals that was discussed, there was clear acknowledgement of pains and challenges and how much behind we are. If you zoom out, you can see how much we know what needs to happen. The work is organized. Everyone understands what needs to happen. The problem is that there are some obstacles. The financial flows are not allowed. We listed a lot of them. But I think the achievement in actually understanding where we need to get to, and I echo Felix's sentiments very much, it's enormous. The ambition is there. So I think answering one of your questions, what needs to happen now? I think even though it seems like 2030 is a little bit far away, now is the time, right now, when we need to get to the table with some of the I would say, different stakeholders, but particularly the two types. One, the hardcore implementers and champions, those that will really roll up their sleeves and who might not be so much in the academic space and theories of change, but are there to step up, particularly given the current political context, which we haven't touched on at all today. And then the second is there's a lot of fascinating work. The second group of people, I think, that need to be brought to the table with those implementers is a lot of academics who are working on the theory of change, on the integration, on really interesting systemic connections that would put environment as an underpinning kind of fundamental to all of the goals. For example, Monash University, the Stockholm Environmental Institute, and those need to be brought together in the next 2 months. And that's my call to action from WWF as well. We're looking for allies. We're looking to bring people to the table to have those very practical discussions about kind of the things we know how to do. It's just a matter of rolling up our sleeves at this point. So thank you very much. And I really enjoyed today's conversation. It brought me, despite all of the challenges, it also brought me a lot of hope because there's so many like-minded people here.
Thanks very much, Elena. I think we could have one or two burning questions from the floor. If there are, you've all listened very well. I can see that. And I see a hand, but you have to find a microphone to ask the question.
Come over here.
The comment. Yeah, maybe that's, yeah. And introduce yourself.
And press the button.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Gabriela from the Department of Sustainable Development from Romania, and I found very interesting your event, and I am here today for promoting our Water Wise Hub project. That is an excellence hub on water in the circular economy. You discuss here about the missing or the lack of finance in water project. I want to invite you to sign up for our newsletter And through this project, we will define strategic action and enable funding access to support venture pilots and research and innovation activity in the circular and decentralized water solution. It's not much, but drop by drop, we will fill the
Drop by
impact.
drop is a good thing to say.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much. I will leave some flyers here,
That's okay.
and you can
Yeah.
sign up. You have a QR code. Thank you very much.
Could I just say, for those who don't know, Romania co-chair the nitrogen working group for UNEP, and they've been doing enormous work. And nitrogen is the biggest planetary boundary that we're exceeding. And I thank you for that.
And not only this event, more. Thank you very much.
Okay, I see a question there. Please.
Hello, my name is Karwa. I represent the Education Above All Foundation based on Qatar and approximately 77 countries with partners. So it's very interesting to hear the discussion today and to know that there is no an update on UN like water policies, for example. And currently I'm working with young people from different universities in the region and beyond. And we're interested to know some good thematic areas where they can contribute in policy briefs, position papers, or policy papers that could contribute and fill in a gap, basically. So I'm brainstorming what could be one of the recommendations from the different speakers in that respect, and taking into consideration the water policy update probably by the young people, because we're empowering the youth to take lead and positions in future of the planet, if I may say, and anything related to climate as well. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. We don't have much time anymore. I see in the chat several questions around how civil society organizations and stakeholders can get the resources to do what they need to do. But that's of course a very broad question. And the same applies for how the role of local and regional authorities can be strengthened. I think the answers to that were in the air this morning already, in terms of collaborate better across these different sectors and across different borders, and find the synergies. I would like to maybe, if the other speakers here would have one last comment or one last sentence for us to take away, because there will be a follow-up of this meeting with it. We will produce a short report, and hopefully other actions. This session is part of a longer series of activities Stakeholder Forum is planning to organize in the next months and the next year. Is there any? What could you maybe
Also remember Albert online.
and or Albert, and any last suggestion or question?
Yeah, so thank you very much. So my last remark here would be that in the synergizing all these SDG goals, Felix, you may remember 2012 when we were in Rio, we started by talking energy, water, and food security nexus. Years later, at your University of North Carolina, we brought in climate dimension onto the nexus, and many others can augment to that. And right now, operationalizing that, I've seen that it's real. There is water energy on the transboundary water transfer, for example, where energy business, production of energy, but also water transfer to other countries. Lesotho exports water to South Africa, and it produces energy from that. There are negotiation discussions that need well coordination. What I would advise here is a high-level kind of coordination of those efforts, because each sector, each SDG has its own challenges, and they are total and they are enough. So people tend to focus on to that. So cross-cutting and be able to coordinating so that we establish common thinking on the interlinkages and interdependence or symbiotic relationship, so that people get sensitized consistently in order to have those linkages implemented. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a really good closing word. No, your mic is. Oh, sorry. Thank you very much. That's a very good closing conclusion from your side. I fully support that. I think the means of implementation, Felix mentioned that should be much more stressed and well, partnerships, finding champions of partnerships, as Felix also said. But I think we here can conclude that the big challenge is not to create new SDGs or to change them, but to make more use of the analysis that is already there and the data that are already there about the interlinkages. And Felix mentioned in the beginning David Leblanc of DESA, who made this beautiful graph of all these interlinkages already 10 years ago, I think. I think we have to start working on that, finding concrete ways to make these interlinkages productive. And with that, I think we can conclude this session. I want to like to thank everybody who spoke, the panelists, the people who were online, people here in the room, because the room has gradually filled with people. And see you next time and in the course of this week in New York, I hope also. There will be a follow-up. Is there anything concrete to say about that, Charles or Felix?
Well, summary. Yeah, it's summary.
We will make a summary, of course. And thank you, Charles, by the way, for organizing this work. And thank you, Elena, for co-organizing. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the day and many other nights events.